How does a fight between a clown and a fireman end up reshaping Toronto's reputation alongside its police force? Today, Toronto is one of the world's biggest cities, with an overall population estimated to be over 6 million people. In 1855, though, it was a much different scenario. It had a rapidly growing population of 40,000 people, thanks in no part to the new railways that connected to the already flourishing rail networks of the United States. Despite the new railways and influx of population, the city still had a reputation as a rough and tumble frontier town. It had 152 taverns in the city as a whole, with 68 of those taverns being along Yonge Street alone, the main street of the city. There were also many brothels in Toronto around this time, and one of these brothels was run by Mary Ann Armstrong. On July 12, 1855, this particular brothel was frequented by members of the Hook and Ladder Firefighting Company. Back in 1855, there was no such thing as the organised professional firefighting services that we know today. Instead, fire services were made up of loosely organised, ill-disciplined volunteer companies who often fought amongst each other to call dibs over who puts out the fire, as getting to the scene first and putting out the fire before anyone else was a matter of pride for these companies. One of the most famous incidents of firefighters fighting each other was on June 29, 1855. The Hook and Ladder Fire Company was responding to a fire on Church Street. They arrived at the same time as another fire company and a fight broke out. When constables arrived to break up the fight, the firemen joined together and, as the building burned down around them, turned to fight the police. This incident would later go on to be named the Firemen's Riot. On July 12th, there were also clowns in attendance at Mary Ann's brothel, from the Setby House Star Troupe Menagerie and Circus, a travelling circus that had come to Toronto for 2 days. Back in 1855, the best way for circuses to make money was travelling around the country to different cities, and that meant constantly putting up and taking down all the tents, props, costumes, the list goes on. So in 1855, if you worked as a clown, you were an entertainer when the circus was set up, but you were a labourer when the circus was not. Combine the Hook and Ladder Firefighting Company and a troupe of rough and tumble clowns from a travelling circus into the same brothel, and you have yourself a recipe for disaster. No one knows how the fight broke out, but we know how it ended. The clowns won a decisive victory, with 2 firefighters being dragged out of the brothel, having been severely beaten. But it wasn't over yet. In 1855, Toronto was run by a small group of Protestant Tory elites, all members of the Orange Order, and they made sure that other Orangemen got all the important roles in the city. The police were all Orangemen, as well as the firefighters. The day after the fight at the brothel, Friday the 13th, an angry orange crowd began to gather around the tent of the travelling circus the clowns belonged to. The circus was located on a big grassy space by the waterfront a few blocks east of the St. Lawrence Market. The farmers and merchants who set up shop there were told to clear out. It's likely the police knew about the coming violence, but the chief of police, Samuel Sherwood, was an Orangeman. That's how he got the job. Hearing of the coming attack, he dragged his feet, before finally sending a few officers to check it out. By the time they got there, it had already begun. People were throwing stones, setting tents on fire, and when the Hook and Ladder Firefighting Company showed up, not to put out the fires, but to join the fight, all hell broke loose. They stormed the circus with pikes and axes, overturned wagons, beat the clowns to a pulp, and, ironically, set fire to things. It was chaos. Only when the mayor of Toronto, George William Allen, showed up with local militia did the crowd disperse. The police were useless. After all, it was their fellow Orangemen inciting the riot. All of the police that were there claimed to not remember any of the rioters that took part. 17 people were tried, only 1 was convicted. To every onlooker, it was a blatant cover-up, and people were not happy. A few years later, there was another Protestant versus Catholic riot, and yet again, the police's memory was conveniently fuzzy. It was a turning point. An inquiry was started, and in 1858, the province of Ontario finally made the necessary amendments, and with that they fired nearly every officer and started the police force entirely from scratch. Despite the rehiring of about half of the officers fired, and 100 further years of Orange stranglehold on Toronto, the reforms proved so effective that Toronto went from having a reputation as a rough and tumble frontier town to gaining the nickname Toronto the Good because of their strict moral code. The reforms also laid the groundwork for Toronto's modern police force that we know today. That's everything. I thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something new.